Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Before we dig into our top stories for today, let's first get a quick check of the day's highlights. Korea is getting older and at a rapid rate, too, as new data show that by the year 2035, being 50 years old will put you right in the middle of the population's age spectrum. A group of New York State millionaires are offering to pay more taxes, while China's Tsinghua Uni Group plans to invest $30 billion to create the country's first giant in the global semiconductor industry. We take a look at some of the business stories that made headlines this week. Korea's gross national income per capita last year dropped for the first time in 6 years. The central bank cites the trend of a weaker local currency as the main reason for the decline. But concerns remain as the current economic conditions still reflect sagging growth prospects. Our Hwang Jae has the details.
It looks like Korea's long targeted goal of topping the $30,000 mark in per capita gross national income will have to sit on the back burner for yet another year. The Bank of Korea says the country's income per person last year stood at $27,340, down 2.6% from a year ago. It's the first decline since the country was pummeled by the global financial crisis in 2009. The central bank attributes the drop to the weakening Korean won against the greenback that dragged down the dollar converted value.
The won on average weakened 7.4% against the dollar last year. So you can say the drop in GNI per capita in dollar terms has everything to do with the exchange rate.
In the local currency, the gross national income per capita did rise more than 4%, but it looks hard for Korea to completely brush aside concerns about growth losing its puff. The economy grew 2.6% last year, marking the slowest pace of expansion in 3 years. And forecasts suggest Korea will fail to expand in the 3% range again this year, facing a plunge in exports for the 14th straight month now and languishing domestic demand.
Recently, uncertainties over growth have been surging. We're seeing a clear trend of households increasing savings instead of spending.
In fact, Korea's overall savings rate hit the highest in 11 years last year, inching above the 35% mark. With that, experts project the BOK is expected to slash its 3% growth outlook for this year when it releases its new forecast next month. And the trim they add could point to more cuts in the key rate down the road that currently stands at a record low of 1.5%. Hwang Jae, Business Daily.
Creating quality jobs is Korea's most pressing economic goal. This is according to Bank of Korea Governor Lee Joo-yeol, who says the reason why employment data receives so much attention is because job security is closely linked to the welfare of households and the public. Last month, the youth unemployment rate in Korea hit an all-time high of 12.5%. Although the top central banker did not deny it is hard to land a job, he explained that the rise was partially due to seasonal factors, such as the mass population movement seen during the Lunar New Year holiday and many young people taking the civil servant exam. He also emphasized the need to gear up for rapid technological developments, especially in the education system, in the face of changes likened to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He noted that innovation in the system will help people prepare for future jobs. Recent statistics reveal that post-retirement bankruptcy is becoming a rising problem here in Korea. According to the Seoul Central District Court, over 400 out of some 1,700 people who declared bankruptcy from January to February this year were in their 60s or older. Court officials say an increasing number of elderly people are declaring bankruptcy due to their inability to pay off debts by working. Now, this is the first time that the Seoul court has released bankruptcy statistics by age group. An OECD report showed that 49.6% of Koreans aged 65 or older were living below the poverty line as of 2012. far exceeding the OECD average of 12.6%. The figure represents the highest poverty rate for senior citizens among the OECD. And in a country of 50 million people, we're seeing Korea's demographic profile shifting towards one that has more older people and fewer children. At this pace, experts say the burden that economically active Koreans will have to shoulder will get much heavier in the future. Our Lee Joo-young has more.
Korea has achieved rapid economic growth over the past several decades, quickly getting back on its feet after the Korean War obliterated the country. But despite the numerous economic miracles, it faces yet another challenge, that is, having one of the world's most rapidly aging populations. Statistics Korea says the country's median age, which is a good barometer of the population's age distribution, is projected to reach 50.8 in the year 2035. It will continue to climb to 57.9 in 2060, which is in stark contrast to 21.8 back in 1980. This means half of the Korean population will be over 57 years old in 2060. The statistics agency says the country's low birth rate of 1.24 and rapid advancements in medical technology are the main reasons behind the quickly graying population. The proportion that senior citizens take up in the total population is also expected to increase. While those aged 65 years and older made up 13.1% of the population last year, that number is projected to reach 40.1% in 2060, up threefold from 2015. Experts say it's this fast aging that is closely tied to reduced consumption and lower labor productivity, considered major stumbling blocks for the economy.
The amount of income you can make in a lifetime is limited, but since you have to live longer with that money, it's becoming the main reason for slower consumption.
And with the country's population expected to start shrinking after peaking at 52 million in 2030, prospects of making Korea young again remain greatly overshadowed. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
Along with an annual 9.3% growth in Korea's bio industry over the past 5 years, outbound shipments of biologic drugs have played a big role in driving up the country's total exports. This is according to Korea Bio, a leading firm in the biotech industry, which said outbound shipments of biopharmaceuticals in 2014 was worth $1.1 billion, jumping 18.2% on year. Among biologic medical products, exports of drugs that control bioimmune activity showed the largest increase, jumping 79% from a year earlier. Market watchers say growth in the domestic biotech industry, as well as rising interest in biopharmaceuticals, have led to progress in production, exports, and investment. Overall investment in the industry reached $1.2 billion last year, climbing 5.1% on year. And it's Friday, and that means it's time for a look through some of the global business stories that made headlines this week. And for that, we're now joined by our Eunice Kim in the studio. Hello, Eunice.
Hello, June.
All right, so this is an interesting story that came out this week. I hear that a group of New York millionaires are calling on the state and lawmakers to raise their taxes.
That's right. They want to pay more taxes. Now, income disparity has been a big topic in the U.S. for years, and particularly so this year because, of course, the U.S. presidential elections.
Yes.
But in New York State, its legislature is in the midst of debating taxes, and that's where this open letter from the millionaires comes in. They want to make sure the tax system does not revert to a regressive one. Take a look.
Economists agree the wealth gap around the world is growing. But it's not just the big picture economists who are concerned. A growing group of the wealthy are too. More than 40 millionaires in New York State this week penned an open letter to Governor Andrew Cuomo and lawmakers who are clashing over whether or not to extend the so-called 1% plan for fairness that taxes the top 1% more. Fourth-generation Rockefeller Stephen Rockefeller, Roy Disney's granddaughter Abigail Disney, and former AT&T executive Leo Hendry were among the signatories of the letter that said they counted themselves as contributors and beneficiaries of New York's economic vibrancy and stood ready to pay more taxes because they saw the need in the state's struggling schools and crumbling infrastructure. It noted the, quote, shameful fact that child poverty in the state was at a record, exceeding 50% in some parts. They believed investments in human and physical infrastructure will pay off in the creation of new jobs and a workforce prepared to fill them. And they said they were willing to fund these initiatives in the form of taxes, proposing the higher 8.8% tax bracket be applied to those making $1 million or more, lowering the bar from the current $2 million. But as the state Senate is led by Republicans who oppose tax hikes, the future of New York State's progressive tax system, which expires at the end of next year, remains in limbo.
Well, raising taxes is always a sensitive issue, but it certainly sounds like it's for a noble cause. But this is not the first time that we've seen billionaires speak out about taxes, right?
You're right. Of course, the world's richest Bill Gates and the third richest Warren Buffett have both been calling on the government to be more proactive about addressing this problem of income and wealth disparity because, as they see it, it can lead to much bigger problems. Warren Buffett said wealth flowing to the top is a natural phenomenon as economies become more specialized, but that having lots of willing but unemployed workers when the country's GDP per capita stands at over $50,000 simply made no sense. Bill Gates, who of course now focuses his full-time efforts on philanthropy, observed there was no self-correcting mechanism in capitalism when it comes to inequality, and that it could have a snowball effect that is, if left unchecked. And the politically influential billionaire Charles Koch took that one step further to blame misguided policies for setting the groundwork for what he called a two-tiered society made up of a permanent underclass of the disadvantaged and for the rich, welfare.
Well, I'm wondering at this point, could there be a solution for a problem so large?
Well, that is certainly a big question, of which there are many solutions, of course, being considered by experts as well as government officials. And one thought I would like to offer is tying what these New York millionaires are offering to the more general call getting louder in economic circles, and that is more fiscal policy. Even central bankers themselves, as they drive interest rates down and extend their expansionary policies, have been calling on governments to do more in their fiscal policy. That is, taxes and spending to get domestic and global economies running again. And I turn to a report by Oxfam earlier this year that had noted the global 1% now own more wealth than the 99% combined. It said dealing with tax dodging, higher wages, and more investment in public services could help slow the widening divide.
All right, let's turn to some other news that came out this week. U.S. President Barack Obama made a historic visit to Cuba, right? The first time in 88 years that a U.S. leader visited this country. Now, what kind of business inroads were made during this highly publicized trip?
Right, so this was certainly an extraordinary trip. It comes more than a year after U.S. President Barack Obama and current Cuban President Raul Castro announced that they would go ahead and restore diplomatic relations. Indeed, Obama was joined by his wife and two daughters, as well as a delegation of hundreds of business and political leaders, as he drove home a message of openness and engagement. Now, ahead of their arrival, Starwood Hotels had announced it had reached the first multi-million-dollar deal with the Cuban government to renovate and manage 3 high-end hotels there, of which there are few, if any, currently. And the U.S. president himself announced that U.S. airlines will begin direct commercial flights into Cuba this year. And while it seems the White House wants to forge ahead with these business ties. The reality is that the U.S. trade embargo on Cuba is very much still there and up only to Congress to cancel. So while executive powers have loosened the rules for trade and travel, there is still an element of uncertainty in these business talks with the communist island. And finally, as China has been trying to free itself from reliance on foreign technology, Tsinghua Uni Group says it has aspirations to build the country's first semiconductor giant. The company's billionaire president, Zhao Weiguo, told Bloomberg in an interview that he is in the process of raising capital towards a goal of $30 billion from local governments. The 49-year-old says he expects to raise about half that amount by the end of this year and bring on private investors and private equity funds to create a force to compete with overseas giants like Samsung Electronics.
All right, well, Samsung better be ready for this. I mean, it's a
I'm
lot
sure
of
they
money.
are bracing. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in today, Eunice.
You bet.
And that wraps it up for today and this week. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next week with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.